42 elite alien warriors were dropped into a survival trial carrying weapons powerful enough to level cities, and only one of them realized the test was never really about fighting. That misunderstanding ended up costing every single one of the others. Now, for context, I've been an official observer at the Galactic Military Academy for 16 full cycles. And trust me when I say I've witnessed some absolutely legendary screw-ups over the years. I've watched cadets from 73 different species attempt the 7-day survival trial, and more often than not, they don't make it. The Crimson Wastes don't give a damn about your noble bloodline, your perfect combat scores, or how many push-ups you can knock out in zero gravity. Out there, none of that matters. The Wastes care about exactly one thing: whether you stay alive. This trial isn't a friendly camping excursion where you toast protein cubes over a fire and sing nostalgic songs about your homeworld. Not even close. This is the final hurdle before graduation, the last filter that separates real soldiers from people who just look sharp in uniform. 7 days, 168 hours, all of it spent in a desert where daytime temperatures regularly hit 50 degrees Celsius, nights plunge below freezing, predators roam freely, sandstorms come out of nowhere, and the universe shows absolutely zero mercy. The numbers alone tell a pretty ugly story. About 40% of cadets need medical evacuation before day 4. Another 20% quit on their own, usually crying, vomiting, or doing both at the same time. That leaves roughly 40% who technically finish the trial, although many cross the line on stretchers mumbling about sand demons and heat mirages that may or may not have actually existed. This particular year, we had 42 cadets officially registered. 42 of the most aggressive, highly trained, heavily decorated military candidates the galaxy could produce. They came from species that had conquered entire star systems. Some were tactical geniuses who had beaten impossible odds in advanced simulations. Others were hardened survivors who had already endured dozens of brutal qualification trials just to earn a spot here. Every one of them arrived at the drop zone loaded down with enough weaponry to kick off a small war. Plasma blades, energy rifles, sonic disruptors, molecular restraint nets, shock batons. If it was designed to hurt something, someone brought it. They showed up ready to fight, ready to dominate, fully convinced they'd prove themselves the apex predator in this miserable field of red sand and shattered rock. And then there was the human. Let me start by introducing the favorites, the cadets everyone expected to run this trial without breaking a sweat. First up was Thaxral, a Sarian from the Kepler Reach. 7 feet tall, built entirely out of scaled muscle, with reflexes fast enough to supposedly snatch a plasma bolt right out of the air. Now, I say supposedly because I've never actually seen anyone pull that off, but Thaxral sure talked like he could. He carried twin plasma blades capable of slicing straight through reinforced steel, and his plan was beautifully straightforward. Kill anything that moved, establish dominance, and rule the food chain. It was about as subtle as a meteor impact, but in its own way, it made sense. Then there was Vorn, an Arthurian whose species had been running successful military campaigns since long before humans figured out fire. He had 6 legs, compound eyes that could see across 17 different spectrums, and a brain that processed battlefield scenarios faster than most computers. His loadout included energy spears, collapsible shields, and enough tactical equipment to supply a small platoon. Vaughn's strategy focused on taking high ground, rationing supplies with near-perfect math, and simply outlasting everyone else through superior planning. On paper, it was a flawless approach. Kisara represented the crystalline collective, and honestly, she might have been the most frightening cadet in the entire group. Her species could survive hard vacuum, shrug off radiation levels that would liquefy most organic life, and regenerate from wounds that would kill almost anything else. She carried sonic disruptors capable of shattering bone and rupturing internal organs from 30 meters away. Her plan was endurance through pure biological advantage. Why bother worrying about the environment when your body itself was basically a living weapons platform? The rest of the group was just as impressive. Drawnak, an obsidian-skinned brute with natural armor plating and massive concussion hammers. Sela, a winged scout who owned the skies and carried precision rifles. Korvax, a mist shade who could nearly vanish at will and hauled around enough toxins to poison an entire water facility. Every one of them was a walking arsenal, a graduate-level lesson in surviving through violence and superior firepower. And then, like I said before, there was the human. Lieutenant Jennifer Reeves stood about 5 feet 6 inches tall and probably weighed 60 kilograms on a good day. She had brown hair pulled back into a simple, practical knot, brown eyes that always looked a little tired, and a face so ordinary you'd forget it 5 minutes after meeting her. When the equipment inspectors checked her loadout, they actually laughed. She didn't have plasma weapons, no energy shields, no molecular nets, shock batons, or anything else that could reasonably be labeled a weapon. Instead, she carried a standard survival pack, a water filtration unit, a solar blanket, nutrition bars that looked like compressed misery, a basic first aid kit, and a hat. Not a helmet, a real physical fabric hat. The other cadets stared at her like she'd shown up naked. Ex-Rala cracked a joke about humans bringing a picnic to a war zone. Juan quietly calculated her survival odds at around 4%. Ex-Rala didn't even bother acknowledging her presence. Jennifer just smiled, adjusted her pack straps, and checked her canteen. In hindsight, we really should have paid more attention to that canteen. At dawn, the dropships released all 42 cadets across a 20-kilometer stretch of the Crimson Wastes. The temperature was already climbing past 40 degrees Celsius, and the red sand went on forever, interrupted only by jagged rock formations that looked like the planet's exposed bones. And those cadets wasted no time. Ex-Rala exploded out of his drop pod like the desert had personally insulted him. Within the first hour, he'd tracked down a native predator, a sand viper nearly 3 meters long with fangs dripping paralytic venom. Did he avoid it? Did he take a wide path around it? Of course not. He slaughtered it with his plasma blades, roared his victory at the empty sky, and dragged the corpse back to his camp as a trophy, because, obviously, nothing improves your odds of survival quite like burning energy on a dominance display that no one sees except a few bored monitoring satellites. By midday, he'd already added 2 more sand vipers to his kill count, along with something the locals call a ridge stalker, which was basically a 6-legged nightmare packed with far too many teeth. He was carving out his territory the only way he knew how, by making sure everyone and everything nearby understood he was the deadliest thing in his sector. His scales were slick with sweat. His breathing had turned heavy and uneven, and yet he looked absolutely delighted with himself. Gorn, on the other hand, followed his plan with textbook precision. The moment he hit the ground, he made a straight line for the tallest rock formation in his assigned zone, a jagged spire that climbed roughly 40 meters above the desert floor. The ascent took him 3 brutal hours under the blazing sun, but eventually he reached the top. Once there, he established his defensive position, carefully arranging shields and spears into layered formations while his scanners swept everything within a 5-kilometer radius. From that height, he had a perfect view of the terrain. Nothing moved without him seeing it. Well, nothing except water. There wasn't any up there, but I'm sure he'd accounted for that. Probably. Kasara's approach was just as predictable in its own way. She marched straight into the deepest, hottest part of her sector and located a cluster of thermal vents that would have cooked most species alive. That's where she decided to settle in. Using her sonic disruptors, she collapsed nearby rocks into a rough defensive ring, turning the area into a fortress that sent a very clear message: come closer and get shattered. The heat seemed to energize her. Her crystalline body actually glowed brighter as it absorbed thermal energy, and she looked completely at home, which, to be fair, she was. The rest of the cadets followed similar patterns. Drunex bulldozed his way through the landscape, leaving destruction in his wake. Sela took to the skies, scouting from above and claiming aerial dominance. Korvax melted into the shadows between rocks, fading into little more than a rumor. Everyone was fighting, everyone was posturing. They were all busy trying to prove they could overpower the environment and each other. And Jennifer? Jennifer walked. She didn't run. She didn't charge. She didn't make some dramatic declaration to the universe. She just walked at a steady, unremarkable pace toward a shallow canyon, about 2 kilometers from where she'd landed. Eventually, she found a seep spring, the kind that barely counted as water, more like damp sand that occasionally admitted to being liquid. She tested it with her filtration system, filled her canteen, and drank slowly, like she had all the time in the world. After that, she located a small overhang, a sad little excuse for a cave that barely offered shade, and used her solar blanket to improve it. She ate 1 nutrition bar, sat down, and waited. I remember thinking this was going to be the shortest trial participation in Academy history. The human would be calling for extraction before sunset. Spoiler alert. I was wrong. Day 2 arrived with all the kindness of a plasma burn to the face. By noon, temperatures spiked to 52 degrees Celsius, and the Crimson Wastes lived up to their reputation. A sandstorm tore through the northern sectors, turning the air into a horizontal grinder that stripped paint clean off our monitoring drones. Axel woke up sore. Now, for a Saurian warrior who trained his entire life for combat, sore was not supposed to be part of the vocabulary. But killing 4 large predators in extreme heat while wearing armor and hauling plasma blades around tends to leave a mark. His muscles throbbed. His scales had lost their shine from dehydration, and the trophy carcass he'd dragged back to camp was rotting fast. Rotting things attract scavengers, and scavengers meant more threats. So he fought them too. More combat, more energy burned, more precious fluids sweating out of a body that desperately needed them to keep internal systems from failing. By the end of the second day, 60% of his water supply was gone, and he'd taken a deep gash on his left arm from a scavenger's claw. It was already showing signs of infection. Treating it properly would have meant admitting weakness, and Thexural didn't do weakness. Obviously, Vorn's brilliant strategy was starting to crack under one very simple oversight. Well, not simple, large, very large, and painfully obvious. His fortress atop the rock spire was excellent for defense and visibility, but water weighs a lot. The supply he'd hauled up during the climb was disappearing faster than expected because, shockingly, sitting in direct sunlight 40 meters above the desert makes you thirsty. His options weren't great. He could stay put and ration himself into dehydration or climb back down, refill his supplies, and then climb all the way back up, burning massive amounts of energy. His compound eyes tracked distant shimmers that might have been water, running calculations on distance, effort, and survival odds. The numbers were ugly. By day 3, he was reducing his intake to tiny sips that would have made a monk feel extravagant. His mandibles clicked constantly with stress. Kisara was holding up better than most, but even crystalline superiority has limits. The thermal vents were perfect during the day, feeding her energy reserves, but nighttime told a different story. Temperatures plunged hard. It turns out that when your survival plan relies entirely on thermal balance, rapid temperature swings are a problem. She began developing microfractures, tiny stress cracks caused by constant expansion and contraction. They weren't fatal yet, but they definitely weren't part of her original calculations. Across the wastes, the pattern repeated itself. Granak had smashed through so many obstacles that his armor plating cracked, exposing sensitive tissue to the sun. Sela burned so much energy flying in the thin, overheated air that her wing muscles started cramping. Korvax hid so well that he forgot to mark 2 of his water caches and couldn't relocate them. By the 3rd day, we'd already evacuated 6 cadets for medical emergencies. 4 more transmitted their surrender codes, begging for extraction. And the human. Jennifer woke up each morning in her pathetic little cave. She drank water. She ate a nutrition bar. During the hottest hours of the day, she stayed in the shade and did absolutely nothing interesting. When evening cooled the air, she walked. Slowly, carefully. She checked her surroundings and refilled her canteen from the seep spring. She ate another nutrition bar, then went back to her shelter and went to sleep. That was it. End of day. That was her entire plan. Drink water, find shade, rest, repeat. No combat, no clever maneuvers, no dramatic speeches aimed at the universe. She was running the most painfully dull survival trial the Academy had ever recorded, and somehow, it was working. She looked fine, exhausted, sure, sunburned, absolutely, but fine. Her water supply hadn't dropped. Her energy reserves were intact. She had no injuries. I'll be honest, I was starting to feel personally insulted by how uneventful this was. Day 4 was when everything finally unraveled, and it did so in spectacular fashion. Thexerol's infected wound had crossed the line from, "I should probably deal with that," to, "I definitely should have dealt with that 3 days ago." The gash on his arm was swollen and leaking something that no living creature should ever leak. The scales around it had turned a sickly gray, and his body temperature spiked into dangerous territory. The mighty Sarian warrior, slayer of every predator foolish enough to enter his domain, was being taken down by bacteria roughly 1/1,000,000th his size. He made it to midday on the 4th day before his pride finally cracked. His claw trembled as he activated his emergency beacon. When the extraction team reached him, he was delirious, rambling about sand demons and insisting he had absolutely won his fight with the ridge-stalker. His plasma blades lay beside him, untouched. All that destructive power, all that killing potential, completely useless against an enemy too small to stab. The medic later said that if he'd waited another 6 hours, he would have lost the arm, possibly his life. But sure, establishing dominance was totally worth it. Vorn's mathematical brilliance failed on day 4 as well. He had rationed his water down to absurd precision, calculating survival needs against the energy cost of climbing down and back up his spire. The problem with math is that it stops mattering once your body decides to shut down. He made it into day 5 before collapsing outright. He simply fell where he stood. All 6 legs gave out at once. His compound eyes lost focus. His mandibles went silent. The extraction team had to use a specialized hover unit to retrieve him because he was too dehydrated to even grip the rappel line. They found his energy spears perfectly positioned, his shields active, his sensors still scanning the desert. None of it mattered. He'd won the high ground and lost the war. His dehydration was so severe that medics submerged him in a fluid immersion tank for 18 hours. The doctors later confirmed his internal organs had started crystallizing. Crystallizing, that's what happens when a brilliant tactical mind forgets that biology doesn't negotiate. Kasara held out until the evening of day 5 before her crystalline body finally betrayed her. The microfractures from thermal stress had spread, fine cracks branching through her structure like spiderwebs. She ignored them, trusting in her species' legendary resilience and regeneration. That trust turned out to be misplaced. When the temperature plunged from 48 degrees to near freezing in under 3 hours that night, her body couldn't handle the strain. She didn't shatter dramatically. That would have been easier. Instead, she began to crack. Slowly. Pieces of her broke away, a finger here, part of a shoulder there, while her fully charged sonic disruptors lay useless on the ground. They were weapons against enemies that could be fought, not against physics and chemistry doing exactly what they always do. She transmitted her emergency code at 0300 hours, her voice distorted by damage to her vocal structure. The extraction team reported that she was crying, which was remarkable because no one had ever documented a member of the crystalline collective crying before. Apparently, even living weapon systems have limits. By the end of day 5, 31 cadets were out. 31. Some evacuated for medical emergencies, some quit on their own. Others were pulled by instructors who decided that letting a cadet die during training made for terrible publicity. The favorites were gone. The warriors were broken. The tactical geniuses had been defeated by a desert that couldn't care less about planning or pride. Drunak's armor failed, and the sun left burns that would scar him for life. Sela tore both wing muscles and lost the ability to fly. Korvax became so dehydrated and disoriented that he walked in circles for 6 hours before collapsing. Weapons, technology, biological superiority, it all turned out to be irrelevant. And Jennifer? She woke up on day 5, drank water, ate a nutrition bar, sat in the shade during the hottest hours, walked in the evening, refilled her canteen, ate another bar, checked her supplies, rested. Her pack was lighter now, her food was running low, her sunburn looked painful, and her lips were cracked and dry. She moved more slowly, more carefully, but she was alert, coherent, hydrated. While warriors armed with plasma blades were being hauled out on stretchers, The human with a hat and a canteen was still on her feet. I stopped calling it boring around day 4. By day 5, I was starting to wonder if we had completely misunderstood what strength actually looked like. Day 6 began with only 3 cadets left in the Crimson Wastes, 3 out of 42 elite candidates. The betting pools hadn't even bothered modeling odds this extreme. The 2 non-human survivors were Quelix, a thermal-adapted native of the Scorch Worlds, and Rintha, an aquatic breather with a modified respiratory rig and absurd endurance metrics. Both had survived through raw biological advantage and, to be fair, an impressive amount of stubbornness. They'd watched the giants fall. They'd seen the unstoppable humbled. And with victory finally within reach, they both made the same critical mistake. They got ambitious. Quelix decided that simply surviving wasn't enough. No, surviving wasn't enough for him. He needed proof that he had dominated the trial. So on day 6, with maybe 30 hours left before extraction, Quelix made a decision that accomplished absolutely nothing except satisfying his ego. He chose to climb the highest peak in his sector, a pointless summit. No tactical value, no survival benefit, just bragging rights. His thermal-adapted biology meant the heat barely registered, which apparently caused him to forget a very basic fact. Climbing mountains still burns energy, drains water, and requires muscles that actually work. He made it halfway up before his leg locked, not a mild cramp, a full muscle seizure that froze his entire limb in place. He clung to the rock face, unable to go up or down, while his water supply sat 200 meters below in the camp he'd abandoned. He hung there for 4 hours, 4 long hours as his grip weakened, finger by finger, until pride finally gave way to survival. When he activated his emergency beacon, the extraction team found him whimpering. The thermal-adapted survivor who had mocked Jennifer's cautious, boring approach was crying like a first-day cadet. They had to airlift him off the mountain. His fingernails were torn loose from the rock, all for a summit that meant absolutely nothing. Rintha's failure somehow managed to be even more absurd. She had been doing well, conserving energy, staying close to water, making smart decisions. Then on day 6, she stumbled across an abandoned camp left behind by a cadet who hadn't made it. Inside, she found weapons. Powerful, elegant, unused weapons. And she couldn't help herself. She spent 6 hours, 6 irreplaceable hours, trying to learn how to use an energy rifle she had never trained with. Why? Because she didn't want to finish the trial looking like a survivor. She wanted to look like a warrior. She wanted a dramatic ending, a victory pose. Instead, she burned through the rest of her energy reserves playing with a weapon she didn't need in heat that was actively killing her, with less than a day remaining. By evening, she collapsed from heat exhaustion. She just went down, her modified breathing apparatus wheezing uselessly. She never fired the rifle once. The extraction team found her unconscious, the weapon beside her fully charged and completely pointless. And then there was one. Jennifer moved through day 6 exactly the way she'd moved through every other day. Drink water, eat a nutrition bar, find shade, rest, walk, refill, eat, sleep. By now, the monitoring instructors had gathered around the screens. Every one of them was watching this utterly unremarkable human do utterly unremarkable things in the most remarkable way possible. Commander Zara, a veteran observer who had overseen 60 trials, kept replaying Jennifer's footage. "She hasn't done anything impressive," he muttered. Exactly, Instructor Vess replied, her tentacles twitching in what might have been admiration. She hasn't done anything stupid either, not once. Do you have any idea how rare that is? We watched Jennifer check her canteen for what had to be the 100th time. We watched her adjust her hat. We watched her sit in the shade, breathing steadily, eyes half closed. She looked exhausted. She looked sunburned. She looked exactly like someone who had spent 6 days surviving a lethal desert. But she was still there, still functional, still aware, still moving forward. "The human is going to win," Zara said quietly. "With a hat and a water filter, she's going to beat 41 cadets who brought enough firepower to level a city." No one argued. Day 7. The final day, 168 hours reduced to their last stretch. Jennifer woke at dawn in her shelter just like every morning before. She drank water. She ate her second-to-last nutrition bar, chewing slowly and deliberately. She packed her gear with the same careful attention she'd shown all week. No rushing, no panic, just the steady routine of someone who had done this 6 times already and saw no reason to change it now. The extraction point was 8 kilometers away. She had mapped the route 3 days earlier, marking shade and a single seep spring along the way. At 700 hours, she started walking, maintaining that same steady, unremarkable pace. Not fast, not slow, sustainable. The monitoring team tracked every step. Multiple satellites followed her movement. Medical sensors watched her vitals. Drones recorded from 6 angles. The most closely observed cadet in Academy history, and she was just walking, 1 foot in front of the other, breathing, sweating, continuing. She stopped twice, once to drink water and rest in the shadow of a rock formation, once to refill her canteen at the seep she'd already marked. Both stops were efficient and brief. She checked her navigation unit, confirmed her heading, and kept moving. At 1430 hours, she crested the final ridge and saw the extraction zone below, a flat stretch marked by beacon pylons shimmering in the heat. She paused for maybe 10 seconds, just looking at it. Then she walked down the slope, boots crunching over red sand and broken stone. At 1507 hours, she stepped across the boundary line. 53 hours before the deadline, she set her pack down and sat heavily on the ground, shoulders slumping, head dropping forward. For the first time in 7 days, she stopped moving with purpose and simply collapsed into exhausted relief. The extraction shuttle arrived 12 minutes later. Commander Zara himself was aboard, along with a full medical team prepared to haul another broken cadet out of the desert. Instead, they found Jennifer sitting cross-legged, drinking the last of her water, her hat pulled low against the sun. "Lieutenant Reeves," Zara said, his translator making his voice sound formal and slightly baffled. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, sir," she answered. Her voice was hoarse from 7 days of dry air, but steady. "Thirsty, ready for a real meal, but I'm good." The medical team scanned her. Dehydrated, yes, but within safe limits. Sunburned, definitely. Minor muscle fatigue, chapped lips, a few blisters on her feet. All things considered, she was in better condition than cadets who had quit on day 2. They loaded her onto the shuttle. As the shuttle lifted away from the surface, Zara pulled up the comparison files. Images filled the display. The other cadets at extraction, fixeral, delirious with fever. Vorn, his organs crystallized from dehydration. Kasrara, literally coming apart at the seams. Quelix, with shredded fingernails. Rintha, unconscious. The warriors, the tacticians, the biologically superior specimens, every single one of them broken. Then Jennifer's scan appeared, tired, worn down, but intact. "She never fought anything," Zara said quietly, mostly to himself. "Not one predator, not one challenge." "No, sir," the medic replied. "She just survived." Turns out that's exactly what a survival trial is supposed to measure. The shuttle climbed higher, leaving the crimson wastes shrinking behind us. In her seat, Jennifer was already asleep, her hat clutched loosely in her hands. She had won. So let me tell you what we learned from what later became known among Academy cadets as the Great Humiliation, or, as the humans called it, with their usual lack of flair. The 7-day trial. 41 cadets arrived armed with weapons built to kill, maim, and annihilate. Plasma blades that slice through steel. Energy spears that punch through armor. Sonic disruptors that shattered bone. They brought the tools of war to a survival test. Because in their minds, and if I'm being honest, in ours as well, survival meant conquest. Survival meant domination. Survival meant proving you were the biggest, baddest, deadliest thing in the area. Jennifer Reeves brought a hat, and she won. The irony is thick enough to cut with one of Thexerol's plasma blades, assuming, of course, he hadn't dropped them while being hauled out for his infected wound. Everyone else asked, "What can I kill?" She asked, "Where's the water?" Everyone wanted to prove they were strong. She just wanted to not die. And it turns out that in a survival situation, not dying is actually the entire point. Shocking, I know. After the trial, the Academy held a mandatory debrief for all surviving cadets. Surviving might be generous. Most were still in medical recovery and attended via hologram, appearing in various states of bandages, embarrassment, and quiet misery. Jennifer showed up in person, clean uniform, still a little sunburned, eating what looked like her first real meal in a week. Commander Zara made them watch the footage, all 7 days of it, every dull, uneventful moment. They watched her walk, drink water, rest, walk some more, drink more water, rest again. No dramatic battles, no tactical genius, no heroic final stand, just patience, consistency, and an absolute refusal to do anything stupid. "Humans have a saying," Zara told them, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had learned something he didn't want to. "Slow and steady wins the race." We dismiss this as primitive philosophy, the motto of a species too weak for direct confrontation. We were wrong. He paused, letting the silence do the work. Humans don't survive because they're the strongest. They survive because they're efficient. They don't waste energy on dominance displays. They don't fight battles they don't need to fight. They don't confuse preparing for war with preparing to stay alive. When a human enters a survival situation, they do the boring work of surviving, and they keep doing it, hour after hour, day after day. Thexral, attending via hologram from his medical bed, looked like he wanted to argue, but the infected arm wrapped in regenerative bandages made a convincing counterpoint all on its own. The reputation shift was immediate and brutal. Before the trial, alien cadets had written humans off as soft, unimpressive, fragile. Afterward, there was a new understanding. Humans weren't weak. They were patient. And patience, it turned out, was terrifying. You can defend against aggression. You can counter tactics. You can outlast biological advantages. But how do you fight someone who simply refuses to quit? Someone who keeps going one boring step at a time long after you've collapsed from exhaustion? You don't. That's the answer. 3 months later, I attended the graduation ceremony. Lieutenant Jennifer Reeves received her commission with the same unremarkable efficiency she'd shown in the wastes. No speech, no bragging. She accepted her rank, nodded politely, and walked off the stage. And somewhere in the audience, 41 other cadets, the ones who survived or retook the trial later, watched her go, finally understanding exactly what had beaten them.